Hello, everyone. Welcome to Expo North 2020. We have a very special guest and so many questions in so little time. We have Barrie here, who is the VP of International Formats, Production and Development at NBCUniversal. Hello.
Hi, Jessica. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you
In
so much
virtual
for
way.
joining us from your lockdown to ours. Barrie, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name's Barrie Kelly, and I oversee the international formats production arm for NBCUniversal. And so by overseeing, that means that I would oversee any productions of IP that is owned by NBCUniversal. Those kind of shows, it's unscripted and scripted. Probably the most famous unscripted shows are things like Top Chef, Real Housewives, SNL, but also we do scripted shows as well, like Suits and House, and we reproduce those shows in any international market, so anywhere from any continent or any country.
Wow. So going down to kind of brass tacks basics before we get a little bit more complicated, can you talk about what a format is and how it might translate into?
Sure. A format is, it's built on pillars, I would say. And so what you have is you create a format that does a certain thing at a certain time, or has a character that is very synonymous with that show. And so therefore that is technically its brand. So when you're selling the format as a product, you're selling not only this brand that people can understand and can work within, but also you're kind of selling success to a degree as well, because most formats that sell are of shows that are very successful in their original markets. And so you've kind of got these two things that you come to the market with: really great ideas, a structure that's very simple to follow, that can be adapted anywhere, but also a very successful format and show itself. So those are really the two key things you need to sell a format.
Brilliant. When you look at taking a format and bridging it internationally, do you have a preconceived idea of what formats work where, or are you approached by companies who are familiar with different shows, who are like, we would like to?
Well, so I work within a team. So I oversee the production side, but there are salespeople all over the world who kind of look after different continents for NBCUniversal. And they absolutely know their markets and what works and what doesn't work. But, you know, being in production and being across production across all of those different continents, you do get a sense of what works where. And in Asia, you know, you're looking more at your kind of game show, quite fun entertainment programming. In Europe, you kind of, you know, have everything, but it's interesting that factual entertainment, you know what I mean by factual entertainment, more less studio-led shows, formats would sell well into Europe. And that's become a big part of the format business. And then obviously you've got the US and North America, which is our home, where we get a lot of our shows from. And, you know, the US do everything in such an incredible way. Everything's so big and large. And what my job is to make sure that we can scale those really big, ambitious ideas and scale them down so people around the world can afford to make those shows. So that's a really big
so
part of what I have to do, and work very closely with the US teams and convey that to the channels and international producers who make the shows.
God, that's amazing. Can you give some examples, some kind of examples of shows that have done that?
Well, in terms of our shows, probably the biggest format that we have is a show called Top Chef, which is not currently in the UK. I don't know if who's seen this around the world, but it is probably one of the most successful food talent challenge shows there is. You know, and in the US, and I would say this, but it is deemed the best show, and it's deemed the best show by the Emmy awards unit as well. So it always gets nominated for awards. And Top Chef does follow that Master Chef model, you know, in that you have these kind of challenges that chefs do, and there's usually an elimination process and win at the end. The difference being Master Chef is for amateurs and Top Chef is for professionals.
Yeah.
And I think that is what makes it kind of makes it more interesting for me, because it means the challenges can be harder and they can be asked to do things. And in terms of tailoring that show internationally, it's really interesting to localize it, you know. And I think the most successful shows are the shows where you kind of take your format, you put it down in the territory, and you say, right, we do this, but what we want is a local flavor. And with Top Chef, because it's very cuisine-led, you can really offer that local flavor to all these shows. So the Top Chef France is insanely successful. So that's on an M6 in France at the moment. Series 11 was one of the most successful ratings ever. But we do it in Top Chef Thailand, Top Chef Vietnam. Again, the budgets are smaller, but the ethos of the show is the same. Everyone is so invested and believes in the passion of the show, and the challenges can be recreated, but you just have to kind of maybe not have as many cameras, or your shooting time is less, or your set isn't as big. And so in a way, that's how you save your costs. You know, you kind of look at all these elements, but you don't want to rip out the heart of the show. So we do it in Asia, we do it in Latam, we do Top Chef Brazil, has a kind of Big Brother style house attached to it. We do all over Europe. So we've kind of, you know, we've really crossed many different boundaries with that show.
Do you know, I can imagine too, when you're looking to translate these things, you know, there's the practical sense of scale and cost. And then there's also, you're so aware of storytelling, there's also those themes where food's universal. I mean, seeing people being really good at what they do is also, that joy is universal. Is scripted harder in the sense of being able to scale things?
Scripted is tougher to sell the format. You know, you don't have as many scripted format sales as unscripted format sales, because usually, you know, with a scripted show, you're taking a show that's probably very well known. So for example, something like, we produced Suits in Asia. So we've got Suits Japan and Suits Korea that were very successful, that have kind of aired over the last couple of years. So you have your own kind of Korean Harvey and Mike, and your own Japanese. So you have those characters. But the way the scripted format business works is that usually when people buy a scripted format, they buy the scripts. You know, the scripts are written, the characters have been created. Hopefully all of the hard work has been done. And what international producers have to do is they have to recreate those scripts and localize it. Again, localizing is very important. So for example, in Korea for Suits, there's a very key, I don't know if anyone can cast their mind back to Ep1, Series 1 of Suits.
Oh yes, I could.
You can. Well, there's a very key storyline where Mike, the first time he meets Harvey, he's kind of carrying a bag of drugs. And that's because he's doing this kind of drug deal. And in Korea, obviously, that is a no-no when it comes to content. You can't really kind of go into that area. And so we had to tweak that and kind of not make it about drugs, but he kind of walked in, and I can't remember exactly how we did it, but we kind of had to change those storylines. And so you have to make those little tweaks to make the show work for that territory. But the style, the look, and again, you know, it goes back to that branding. I think shows have a brand. The big formats, you know, when you see them on screen anywhere in the world, made by whichever country, you know what that show is. And that is about the branding of the show. So it's so we kind of did it. It's no formats is easy, I'll be honest with you. Recreating a format show anywhere in the world is tough. Everyone will say that, whoever works in the business. But it's scripted, I think, is a little bit trickier in that respect.
Do you know, this feels like beautiful alchemy in the sense that you're asking what's the real essential mechanics of the show that make it the show itself, and then what can be locally specific so that it speaks to that particular culture and the nuances in that culture. It's a really kind of a magic kind of storytelling that you're doing.
It is, and I think, you know, that's the constant. You know, I think it is all about, you know, we all make shows where, you know, story is everything. You know, every show, every format that you make, and we kind of cover we do game shows, we do constructed reality shows, we do talent competitions, we do live comedy sketch shows. They all have a story. They all have a, you know, usually an ABC storyline, which everyone can follow, which you would have in any scripted show. But you'd have that in a game show. You know, if someone wins a certain amount of money, they've won a certain amount of money for a reason, and they've kind of gone through these ups and downs to get there. So during a show, so whatever happens, you're always looking at stories. And also, I think what I'm passionate about is kind of taking stories and lifting them from one culture to another.
Oh,
I think that
fabulous.
it's fascinating, and I think it's something that is absolutely, it's becoming more prevalent. It's becoming more
Yeah.
important. You look at the world as a whole is affected at the moment by what's going on, and
Yeah.
I think everyone's going to be telling similar stories and can talk to each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's when it comes to formats. We go and make a show, and we kind of want to tell a slightly different story, but the story is accessible to every audience, and I think that's
Fabulous.
my passion when it comes to formats.
Were there anything along the way that you're learning that's surprising, hard, or easy about translating stories?
Hmm. Uh, it's not, I wouldn't say easy, but I would say that there are the universal themes. You are kind of actually, I tell you what, I'll backtrack a little bit there. I think the thing that I'm always impressed by, and I think this is something my background, I used to work for the BBC for many years in production, and so in the UK, we're all very proud of what we do. And are, without a doubt, one of the best producers in the world. I think I'm sure people say we are the best, but I am always impressed by the amount of skills everywhere in the world. I've worked on productions in everywhere from Indonesia to El Salvador to Iceland. So you kind of take all of these countries, and I'm always so impressed by how fantastic all of these production teams are in recreating these formats with a minuscule of the budgets. And so that is something I'm always impressed by. And therefore that kind of makes my job a little easier, because you've got so many talented people working on the shows. So you don't have to go in and kind of go, oh my God, this isn't going to work. What's hard is, I think it's getting harder and harder to sell shows. There's less money out there. There's less, broadcasters don't have as much money to kind of take risks. And I think with formats, what we try and do is we try and say, look, we're trying to sell success, so therefore the broadcaster doesn't need to take the risk, because we know it works, and hopefully it will work in your territory. The one other thing that I think is always important is that we're looking to develop shows. And so one other part of my job is developing shows. So I develop shows. We do co-development deals with all kinds of channels and broadcasters. So we've just done a co-development deal with a Japanese broadcaster, where we co-developed a kind of hidden camera game show called the Secret Game Show.
That process of co-developing, it's so collaborative. What does that look like when you're co-developing?
Well, it's just taking the Japanese example. Look, we work with ABC Asahi in Japan, and it was we'd have a regular 2-week call where we talk through the idea, and we kind of have action points off the back of those calls. But the original idea was mine, and so I kind of mentioned the idea to them, and then they kind of took it and said, well, what about if we did this? And you put it in a Japanese. The show is based in offices and workplaces around the country, and you have to play the game show. So they kind of gave it its own identity.
Yeah.
So it's been a fascinating process. But again, you always come down to the fact that, everyone that works in TV has the same sensibility, has the same knowledge, and you have that connection with them. And so we're all the same, and we all have a bond. And that's why the development process really works. And it's probably one of the most rewarding parts of my job, actually, I would say.
Barrie, that's so fantastic. It must make the world feel a little bit closer. The fact that you get to collaborate.
It's a very, very small world. It really is. Everywhere you go, every TV studio in the world is kind of the same. It's kind of like you could be in a TV studio anywhere. So
I find that very comforting.
It is. It's very comforting. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. And can I ask, are any of the new technologies that also connect people through media, like TikTok, YouTube, does that jog your brain at all in terms of being like, oh, clearly those stories are rippling in these different cultures, and or not really?
Yeah, I think what we're trying at the moment now, the formats business has usually been quite an old-fashioned business, in that you would sell a show to a big broadcaster, it goes on free to air, and it gets success, and therefore you take that everywhere. Whereas I think now, because there are so many different platforms, YouTube and TikTok perhaps aren't there when it comes to creating the content, especially in the unscripted space.
Yeah.
But you have the S4 platforms, you have Quibi, you have all of these
Yeah.
different platforms that we're now looking at how we can incorporate formats into those different platforms. So format is evolving. You're still with format, you're still having to sell some success. And so how you measure that success on TikTok and YouTube is by views. But again, it's not, I don't necessarily think people are coming to those platforms to see formats. YouTube is very successful doing what it does. TikTok is the same.
Exactly.
So it's whether we're kind of at that, I'm not saying it won't happen, but whether we're there right now is I would probably say no.
And I have to mention the COVID elephant in the room, although everyone's sick of talking about it. Are there any, I guess, more positive way of looking at it, are there any benefits or coping strategies that you guys have found that are going to be takeaways from this particular time?
I think one thing that I think everyone has experienced from COVID is this need to reconnect. Everyone's reconnecting, whether it's friends you haven't seen for a long time, whatever. We can do it via this, this process here. But I think one thing I've been doing is, we have Top Chef and Real Housewives made in many different countries, and we try and join all the production companies, execs together on Zoom calls where everyone can talk about what they're doing and how they want to get everything up and running. And I think again, it's that, that's something we've never done before. And this situation we're in now has kind of meant that, look, actually we should be doing this. We should all be helping each other get back into production. So, it's created those bonds, which I think is quite interesting, and hopefully they will last past this, and we'll do that more regularly. So I think that's been quite a positive thing from.
Barrie, that's really wonderful, because I have to say, being entertained and hearing good stories, especially stories that can bridge cultures and create a shared experience around the world, is something we really need and are relying on when we're in lockdown. So thank you for the work you do. Can you leave us with a little bit of advice before we go?
Yes, and I think you did ask me this, and I kind of thought, oh God, what advice can I give you? The only advice I would ever give is, and I didn't, my life, my career, I've kind of worked in radio, I've worked in TV, I've worked in the international formats business. I think, and now we're in a situation where, life may not be the same after all of this. And I think my advice that someone always gave me, which is something I've thought, is never be afraid of change. Never be afraid of change. But because I think you will always, if you change your job or change what you're doing or finesse some aspect of your career to focus on something, it will usually end up being a beneficial thing for you, and you'll end up becoming a better producer or a better person at the end of it. So I think that's something that I think is probably any advice I would give.
That is fantastic advice. Scary, but fantastic advice.
Scary advice. Yeah, I didn't say it was. No, it's scary. I'm scared, more scared than anyone. But I think that is it's very important to never be afraid of it.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's wonderful. Barrie, thank you so much for joining us.
No worries, my pleasure.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to XpoNorth Digital Shorts. I am so excited today to have Valerie here, who is President and CEO of the Canada Media Fund. Hello, Valerie.
Hello, how are you? Hello, everybody who's out there listening and watching and observing.
So you have a job that I think a lot of people are going to be envious over. It just seems so fun and pretty amazing. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm the CEO at the Canada Media Fund, and we really are the largest agency in the country that finances television and digital media. And we got that mandate in 2009 from a very progressive cabinet minister who said, the world is soon going to watch content anytime, any place on the platform of their choice, and we better get with the program. So that's what we do. We have about a $350 million fund in both traditional TV and digital media. And a lot of the exciting content that we're seeing and risk-taking and innovation is certainly coming out of the digital media field. So that's what we do at the CMF.
That's just awesome. And before we go into a little bit about the current landscape and what's happening now, because it's a very interesting time to be commissioning things and making things, right. How did you get to do what you do? It was a complete accident. I've never applied for a job in my life, and I've been at this field now for getting close to
For 35 years, I would say. And I've always worked in the arts and culture field. I actually trained in the theater. I was at the drama studio of Ealing in London many years ago after university. And then my family is German, Polish origin, and they are really good at cleaning up messes. And every time an organization in my worldview would collapse, they'd call me up and I'd say, oh yeah, I could probably fix that. So I'm a good fixer in terms of things that need to change or progress or be just generally cleaned up. So every job I've had, I've either fallen into or been headhunted for. I have very little formal administrative training, and some, the Banff Arts Administration program by way of example, but most of my life I've learned on the job through practical experience. And I'll tell you, you never get to these kind of positions on your own. I have walked beside and behind a lot of tremendous people who've taught me the most extraordinary things, both personally and professionally along the way. But this job I've had since 2006. So I've been here getting a little long in the tooth, one might say, for this kind of work. But every time I try to get out, there's another big transition, another big federal move that is interesting from a policy perspective. So I've stuck it out this long. And of course, we're in a big one right now.
I was just going to say, I couldn't think of a better time for you to be where you are with the talents and skills you have. I love that you have a theater background, clearly like a true connection with the arts, and you have the ability to understand administrative stuff and fix things, which is a very rare combination of skills. So tell me what's happening right now. What does this look like?
Like the rest of the world, we were heavily impacted in our sector by the virus. 1,500 projects down, people like in a state of shock, scrambling, everything ground to a halt, like it did everywhere. And so, of course, like many others, we had the staff working remotely, provided equipment, provided support. I think it's really one of the really important things is to keep communication very close to the heart during this time. Okay. So we do set up bi-weekly calls with all staff. We have a small management group that meets every week just to kind of keep the machinery flowing, if you like, in spite of everything we're facing. A lot of people working from home are finding it very isolating and almost frightening and sad and depressed, and others are full of joy because they're not dealing with the usual. So it's a mix and a gamut, but I think people generally are coping extremely well. Yeah. The other big thing we've been doing is, we've been very fortunate. Our government has put a lot of money out of the door. Our first call with the minister, our minister, Guibault in Heritage, said that, I think that was sort of mid-April, and they had already put the value of 2 annual federal budgets out the door to support various sectors and industry, not just ours, obviously. And when you think about it in that context, it's a lot of cash that, they're trying, I think, very hard and doing a very good job at trying to support what needs to be supported so that we can all recover from this. For us, it involved a lot of negotiation and discussion. We're not the aerospace or manufacturing or agriculture industry. We don't make widgets. It's a very eclectic and very diverse industry in terms of the type of contract, how the industry actually works. So we did a lot of negotiation through our department over the emergency relief funds, which I'm really thrilled to say for both us and Telefilm Canada, there was about 127 million, of which 88 came to the Canada Media Fund, and we provided emergency relief within 10 days to our industry out there. So we turned it around on a dime. Yeah, our staff was just incredible on it. I can't say enough good things about it. I'm not just giving you a platitude. I was amazed because it's a big machine, and 88 million is a lot of money. And, luckily we had great people who were on the front lines who fixed all the problems, and we opened within 10 days. And overnight, of the roughly 1,000 parent companies that were eligible, we had about 300 applications like overnight in 24 hours. So clearly, the need is out there. But I think the other interesting thing that we've been looking at is, yes, this is a crisis, and yes, we're responding to it. Developed a kind of a 3-phase document on, dealing with the crisis, and then stimulus to restart the industry, and then what might growth look like. And I think the interesting thing is it's not going to be the same as it was. If people who are trying to go back to where we were, it's never going to happen. I think we're going to have a very different industry. There'll be some collateral damage, of course. There can't help but be that in a time like this. But my other observation is there's some really creative and interesting and innovative work going on out there. People are so, for example, my heart was warmed when I heard this. We have a big medical series in Canada that donated all of their medical equipment to, frontline workers and hospitals that needed that equipment at this time because they have no use for it at this particular moment. And that's just on a human empathy level. But I've seen experimentation in production. We know there's a lot of development going on. In fact, while all of this is going on, we're still managing our regular program, and our stats are looking like they're pretty comparable with previous years. It's a bit of a surprise. We expected things to be way down, but in fact, they're almost level. Now, a lot of that's in development, which would make sense. And it's like everybody's getting dressed up for the party and we're all getting on but we just don't know when the party's going to be. So like everywhere else, the big question is, when can production restart? Huge issues around that in terms of compliance with new health and safety measures. Nobody expected this. Where's the money going to come from? And of course, the big problem is the question of insurance. And a lot of companies now have not allowed, diseases like this to be covered. So our production industry is working very hard on those things to look at what other countries are doing in terms of insurance and provisions for insurance. But I think it's going to be interesting. People are learning, not just in our sector, but in many, to work differently, to work in different ways, to work in some ways more collaboratively. We've been talking a lot to our visual effects people. They're very busy right now. But of course, the concern there is, once they're finished this kind of tranche of activity that had been produced before, they're going to have a big hole until production starts up again. So they're probably going to be affected more, come August, September than right now. So it's a very, nobody can second guess this or what's going to happen or where it's going to go. And I think we have to bear in mind, we're all human beings. We're doing the best we can. And what I've always said to the staff is just, this is a time you're all working full on. They're all A-type personalities. They're all overachievers. So, the flexibility is required. If your dog's got to go to the vet, or you got to pick up your kids, or you're trying to deal with a partner that's around you every day, which is very new for many people, that's okay. It's not a 9-to-5 kind of environment. So we're getting the job done. I reported out to my board recently about what we'd accomplished in the 8-week period, and I was shocked. So, people are working very hard at the CMF, and we're getting the job done. And just, cut yourself a little slack. It's okay, if you're not working from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. If you have to work in the evenings or you can't do something, that's fine. It's just where we're at, and we'll all get through it.
That's so heartening to hear. It's really heartening to hear that the industry is so responsive to the needs, getting the money out, that there seems to be a path of development where that is traditional filmmaking. It's kind of still saying, I hope there's a party.
Yeah,
and the party will happen soon, and we're just all paused. And then there's another part of the industry that's saying we need a pivot, whether it's turning a movie into an audio play first because all the actors are home, to saying, special effects actually can build things out and maybe be able to work with the insurance companies in a way to make safer sets. You're quite right. There's room for innovation here.
I think so. I think there is. I see that even in my own work. It's different. Some of it's the same, but it's different. So I think in spite of the hit and the impact, and I'm not dismissing that in any way, shape, or form. But I think as human beings, we also have to have some empathy around that, and things will change. Our broadcasters in the country, but maybe now about a month ago, did a big program called Stronger Together. And it was right from Buffy to Bieber to Ryan Reynolds to everybody at French market, English market. 11 million views across all those platforms, which was outstanding for the country. So I think that's just an indication that people have recognized where we are. We are all in this together, that's for sure. And keeping each other supported in this time is pretty, it's what's critical, really.
And we're all benefiting, I think, from the incredible reach your media fund has. I mean, I know a lot of people are watching from Versailles and costume dramas that happen elsewhere to I don't know if the media fund was involved with Schitt's Creek, but I know a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of people are.
Oh, yeah.
They're watching. I mean,
I know,
Brilliant.
it's great. We're very proud of that. And, you know, we've had such great co-production partnerships around the world and
Yeah.
co-ventures. We've certainly worked with XpoNorth, Ian and company. Everybody's been fantastic. And I think, you know, one of the things I recognized a few years ago is that in spite of our very large fund, we're a small country. And if we're going to really leverage that money, and this is a global business that people are working in, one of the best things we can do is partner with great partners around the world. And we have, you know, in just the partnership program, about 12 or 15 direct partnerships, let alone all the co-production that goes on. And I think the world's always interested in good stories, no matter where they come from.
Totally.
And we've certainly seen that. Yeah.
That's totally
One of the
right.
things we also did, I should mention, because it's been so useful to everybody and anybody can access it. Our team, in about a 2-week period, built a COVID standalone microsite. And on that site is all the information, if you're Canadian, on all the programs that are available. There's a newsletter with it. Our trends department is doing podcasts on various innovations in the sector, and all of that's available on the CMF website. So it's been a really important tool for people, and I think very much appreciated. And again, they turned that around in 2 weeks. They just gathered up information
so
from
hard
all
at
over the
work.
world. Yeah. They're really doing a good job. The other thing we did that was fun and really interesting was we have the Made New in French brand, which celebrates Canadian content and talent, no matter where they're working from in this day and age. And we had 2 very well-known, one in the French market, one in the English market, director, writer, actor type people do virtual tours of content from coast to coast to coast. So they would start in Newfoundland with a show that had been very well known there. It might be a show from the past, not necessarily a new one, and went across the country and talked about the show and then told people where they could screen it while the crisis had hit and COVID started. So it was a lot of fun, and it brought a lot of attention, I think, from both language markets to Canadian content that's been made and been very successful.
That's so fun that you're still finding things to do now that are creating connections, creating a greater sense of community, showcasing talent. I think that's just awesome. So what does the future look like? I feel like I could ask anyone, but I feel in safe hands with the fixer here. So what does the future look like?
Just before we leave the talent thing, though, I have to mention there's a series on CBC called Kim's Convenience, which is known worldwide and was a #1 show in Korea. And one of the actors there, Simu Liu, has just been hired to be in Marvel's new big, what's it called? Shea Chai, I think. And so what we did through Made New, he's the ambassador for the month of May, and he's highlighting the success of all our Asian creators and talent and content that's happened out of Canada. Sandra Oh and everybody else that's involved.
Yes.
So that's been a really exciting, again, a real creative, fun, and interesting way to really expose our incredible talent to the world. So what's the future look like? Well, the future, I think, is the things of being scary and excited. You know, we're looking at the CMF program. It's our 10th anniversary this year. I mean, the fund itself has been around for about 30 years, but since we got the mandate for both traditional TV and digital media, that's been 10 years. And while it's worked incredibly well and the success stories are many, you know, we're in a different time than 10 years ago. There's a few snags, I call them, that we'd like to see or like to get some relief from. Our industry is working in a global environment. Our Canadian industry is contracting a bit. You know, the impact of the foreign OTTs has been felt, and there's good and bad to all of that. You know, a great opportunity to sell your content worldwide and be exposed to worldwide audiences, but you lose a lot of your rights, and it's put a lot of downward pressure on the Canadian broadcasting system for sure. You know, without getting too technical, we kind of have 2 tiers. Those who have to contribute to the making of the content and those who don't, that are very active in the country. So I think that's going to shift. We did a big review of the Broadcast and Telecommunications Acts, and of course now all of that's been on hold because of the virus, but I think that'll get picked back up again. And for us at the CMF, I mean, in our growth strategy, we want to see a future where the CMF becomes a very strong content fund. I really believe that as long as we have tools in this country to make stellar content that the world is interested in, the market will be interested and the market will pick it up. So I think for us, you know, the future will be different. I don't think there's any choice about that, but that doesn't mean it's negative. I mean, there are, again, it's overcoming and trying to kind of hold the big waters at bay for the industry while we get through this, and we will. and we'll get through it and we'll come around again. And I think, you know, really good. My belief is always, I mean, it's a bit of a platitude, but everybody loves a good story. And if you're in a position and you have support to do good storytelling, then it will survive. And I think be a kind of more interesting, better place. I do hope we aren't flooded with COVID stories.
I was just going to say that. I was going to say, is there a certain type of story? You know, stories always speak to the zeitgeist, but we're all going to be so sick of COVID. We're going to want something.
We're going to be so sick of it. And I mean, I've already seen online a whole bunch of things about, you know, stories from the underground, stories from the COVID, and we will have that for sure. Yeah. People have to find how they're feeling about everything that's going on. But I hope it's, you know, we're not flooded with it. We can kind of get past that. In talking to, you know, CBC just did their upfronts the other day, and other broadcasters in Canada are doing the same. And there's some pretty interesting stuff coming down the pipe.
Right.
The real key will be when production can get going again. Yeah. I mean, and that as this goes on, and if there is the second wave that everybody's been discussing, you know, it's anybody's second guess. Some are saying, oh, we're aiming to start up production in August. Some are saying there'll be none till the first quarter of 2021. And I think it'll vary all over the place. So every country and every type of, you know, agency like us will just have to see how it goes and be in step, I think, with what happens. We've tried our hardest to be very flexible. We have certain restrictions based on how the program was developed in the Broadcasting Act in Canada, which we hope to get even increased relief from after this. Because I think it's pointed out that flexibility is key, no matter if you're living through a crisis like this or at any time. But I think, you know, we're just going to have to go step by step and see how it goes.
Well, what I think is really, really inspiring is that you guys are still such a team, being really productive about being able to help, still reach out, still take what's very important to you, make it happen while refining maybe some goals and learning from this. I think that's a very valuable use of this time.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of learning going on for everybody. That's for sure.
Yeah. That's great. Valerie, can I ask a little bit of advice before we leave? I hate to do this, but we're already over time. Can you leave us with a little bit of advice that you found helps you work better, helps you in a situation, or something you've learned along the way that's very valuable?
Breathe. You know, we're all human beings at the end of the day. We're all in this together. And what I have found the most valuable, even though I fight it, because I'm an A-type personality too, and you know, you have this guilt about, oh my God, I got to put in my 8, 10, 12 hours today. Just stop and breathe. I mean, as I said, I'm so fortunate. At 6 a.m, I can walk out to the pasture. Many people in the world don't have that luxury. But even if you're in an apartment with a balcony, step outside, breathe, and just cut yourself some slack. It doesn't mean you have to be lazy or not do anything. But I think for me, the most important thing this virus offers is reflection. It's a chance just to get off that wheel. You know, I was on a plane every 4 days and my body had it. And I didn't realize how bad it was until this hit. And I think we just have to stop and go inside a little bit instead of so much outside, and see what's of real value to us as human beings, what's important, and how we can support others in the world. Because if this isn't the time to do it, who knows?
Amen to that. That's just wonderful. Valerie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. And hello to everybody at XpoNorth. Love you guys very much. I can hardly wait to get back to Scotland.
We can't wait for that. That sounds great.